Hi, welcome to July's Astrology. Here we are in the second half of 2024, which is quite incredible. And to begin, I kind of feel the word integration coming through really strongly for July. So I have this intuitive sense before even getting into the astrology that we've sort of reached a point of completion, or there's some sense of like a solidity and a point of pause for integration, or at least slowing down for integration, that there's sort of like a stabilization happening. Um, and that both makes sense with some of the transits, and then with some of the transits, you could argue a very different point, but that's just sort of the feeling I'm getting here in July. So the big thing as we start July is Saturn has just gone retrograde. Saturn went retrograde on the 30th of June, and Saturn will be retrograde until the 15th of November. But here at the beginning of Saturn's retrograde in July, Saturn is the planet of restrictions, limits, the reality principle. It brings solidity, refinement, and structure. And it also brings endings, limits, and constriction. It also represents systems and societal structures. Um, and so with this Saturn retrograde, definitely, it makes sense to be thinking of some sort of slowing down. And there might be a bit of a reality check here with Saturn going retrograde as well. That there's a need to, there's been huge expansive energy for the last few months, for the whole year, really, with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And so this, like Saturn is a real contrast. We often contrast Saturn and Jupiter as sort of being like a bit of a polarity in a way, that Jupiter is all about expansion and possibilities and this sort of buoyant optimism, and Saturn is all about reality and structure and limits and constriction and kind of critical thought. So like feels a bit opposite. And we often prefer the idea of expansion. Like we live in a culture with this sort of myth of perpetual growth. But even in spiritual communities, like it's lovely, oh, the energy is expanding and possibilities are expanding. And that sounds great. We don't so much like to hear, well, you need to look at your self-discipline and your systems and your structures, and you need to slow down and refine and constrict. And yet, Saturn is so important because Saturn makes things really solid and really real. Like we live in the realm of Saturn. Saturn is sort of manifest physical reality. It also governs time. So Saturn is that sort of reality principle, and we're being called here to slow down, look at where we need to refine structures or create structures, look at where we need more self-discipline, or we might need to accept limits. And doing that is actually really valuable. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but it is really valuable, because with that, we find a new level of solidity, a new level of integration, and we can build something really solid that's really going to last. That's the benefit of Saturn, that it's wisdom or structure, or even like something manifest, something really solid that will be really durable and last. And it also feels particularly important because the other retrograde that's happening pretty much around the same time, Neptune goes retrograde on the 2nd of July and will be retrograde until 7th of December. And Neptune is the planet of spirituality, illusions, confusion, also kind of like transcendent beauty, creativity, art of a very high level, and also addiction, like things Neptune is sort of like the loss of self, where things get a bit foggy and a bit hazy. And that can be really beautiful in a transcendent experience or connection to spirit, or even connection to other people with, you know, compassion and sympathy. All of these would be very Neptunian. Or it can be a bit more shadowy in addictions, whether that's addictions to substances or addictions to other people. Or just ways we lose ourselves, or we seek to lose ourselves. And Neptune is going retrograde here at around the same time as Saturn. And the next big collective transit that we're heading into is Neptune-Saturn conjunct. So the two planets will come together in conjunction, which will happen next year, over next summer. But actually it's sort of starting now. They're within 10 degrees of each other, which is close enough that the conjunction is said to have begun. You know, they're close enough that their energies are starting to influence each other. And at this point where they're sort of beginning, you know, around the time of the beginning of their conjunction, they're also both going retrograde at the same time. So I just find this quite interesting. It feels like there might be something this month that's giving hints or heralding the beginning of this next major transit that we're moving into. And Saturn Neptune conjunct is an interesting one, because it's sort of like the reality principle of Saturn, and sort of where we lose reality in illusion and in kind of the edges of things, the edges of solid things, you know, disappear with Neptune. But when the two of them come together, like, I was sitting with this and it feels really vast and multifaceted how that could manifest. And of course, it's going to depend what part of your chart it's in. But it feels like it has the potential for something really beautiful. And it also has the potential to be quite difficult. And I imagine there's likely to be a bit of both. If we're lucky enough to access the beautiful side of it, there's likely to be a bit of both. Because Saturn Neptune conjunct, it could be the manifestation, the bringing into form of something that is beautiful in a really transcendent way. Or it could literally be, you know, the manifestation, the materialization of the dream, of the ideal, which is Neptune. And it could be some sense of oneness consciousness, of like compassionate connection to each other, that sort of level of consciousness coming into our societal structures and systems somehow. Could be. But along the way, it could also be disillusionment. So Saturn coming in and refining and bringing sort of a reality slap to places that our expectations have been unrealistic, making us have to face the ending of addictive behaviors, of places that we've lost ourselves, of places that we've been a bit sort of even just confused, or indulging in illusions, or losing ourselves in addictive behaviors. They're definitely, it depends person by person, but I'm kind of imagining for most of us, there's going to be some sort of disillusioning along the way. And I've certainly been noticing this a bit myself in the last few months, starting to come through in the house that this is in my own personal chart, that there's a disillusionment. There's a sort of realizing where, God, I was actually being really idealistic about this, and sort of kind of holding on to my ideal about the way things should be. And in doing that, I'm actually not dealing with reality at all. And, you know, disillusionment is hard. It's not nice to lose the ideal of something, that sense that that perfection of how something could be wonderful, how something could be, you know, that kind of like high peak experience of connection. And yet, often I think when we hold on to the ideal, we're not connected with reality. And there's a loss in that as well. So with the disillusionment, with the letting go of the ideal, we kind of come into reality in a new way. We become more grounded, and maybe we can actually experience something in a manifested concrete form. And if we're always holding on to the illusion or the ideal, you know, the potential never actually gets realized. And even though the potential being realized in manifest form is more limited than the ideal, it's also more real. And I think that's sort of the edge we're working with in this transit. And this is a long transit, like it's begun already, and it'll be exact in summer next year, but it's active, I think, into 2027. So it is a long transit. And so it's a great time to really start noticing where reality is kind of challenging you, where you are being disillusioned, and to really start getting, honest with yourself or working with that, because I think there's such potential, beautiful benefits for that. If we do face up to reality, we could give form to something really beautiful. If we don't, it could be much more difficult. Like we could then be dealing with consequences of addiction, consequences of illusion. Yeah, the reality of not facing reality, could eventually catch up to us. But as I say, with the retrograde starting now this month, and certainly with the retrograde of Saturn, I think we're being called to look at where we need more self-discipline. Where are we being, where is life reflecting to us that we need to accept our limits in this area? We need to look at our structures. We need more refinement, more solidity, or more self-discipline. And then on the 5th of July, Friday the 5th of July, we have our new moon of the month at 14 degrees of Cancer. And this new moon is conjunct Venus, which has been a theme for the last month or two. Venus has sort of been in there in the lunation cycles, so she's still there. It's 8 degrees. She's 8 degrees from the new moon, so she's a little bit wider, but she's definitely still present. And the new moon is sextiling Saturn. So it sort of feels like this new moon on Friday the 5th of July is a really good time actually to be tuning in and start seeding your intentions around what structures you're building, where you're going to commit yourself, commit your time, focus, self-discipline, because you want to birth something beautiful. You want to realize a dream. It feels like, yeah, that it could be a lovely time to focus our awareness on that, as the moon, the new moon, is coming into relationship with Saturn at that time. At the time of the new moon, Mercury is also opposite Pluto. So that could be a bit feisty. Mercury, the planet of communications, of our mind, how we think about things. And then Pluto, the planet of the unconscious, intensity, things that are hidden, power struggles, power and powerlessness. Yeah, it'd be easy to get in a fight around the end of this week, I'd say, possibly. There could also be information coming to light about things that have been hidden, or about insidious sort of power plays. Could also be a great time to stand in your power if there's been something you've been really needing to say and communicate. Also could be a really good time to be thinking about our unconscious patterns, and digging underneath the surface, because there's the possibility that we can know things that are underneath the surface. We can there's a relationship happening between mind and unconscious, so it's a good time for, say, psychotherapy work. The other major transit then of this month is that Mars is coming to conjunct Uranus. And again, this is sort of active all month, really. But it's exact on the 15th of July. So this, again, is a pretty feisty energy. Uranus has been talked about a lot in general, and I've certainly talked about it a lot in general recently, because we've had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is kind of the most recent major collective aspect that we've all been feeling and living through. And so Uranus is the planet of revolutions, sort of sudden inspiration, the lightning bolt moments where we have a flash of seeing things completely differently, and then things are kind of never the same again. It can also bring that new kind of totally paradigm shifted new consciousness in a difficult way through sudden changes, sudden endings, big upheaval and big change in our lives. So I think there's been a lot of that going on over the last sort of year, especially this year, and especially the last few months, because of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And Jupiter, you know, being in there, it could also be like wonderful new possibilities. But I think Uranus is just so vast, it tends to be difficult. And certainly that's what I've been noticing personally and in other people, that the realizations and the changes in how we like structure our consciousness and understand the world, because it sort of is at that level. You know, they've been challenging. It's been a lot. And Mars coming in there. So Mars is a planet of action. It's like how we assert ourselves. It can be anger, can be war. It's quite fiery. It's sort of the survival instinct. It's the self-interest kind of principle. And Mars coming in there to conjunct Uranus. I mean, that's sort of, you know, revolutionary action, protests, civil disobedience. It's also a really active energy, and it could be quite unstable energetically. There could be sudden changes, there could be accidents. But on a positive level, I think it's, you know, we could kind of take charge with this, and it could be taking action and really asserting ourselves based on these new ideals. Like it's time to put into action all of these new possibilities that we've been opening to over the last month or so. And so there's maybe this new kind of embodiment that now we move forward with that in a, you know, that we're actually putting into action something that's been more on the level of sort of energy and consciousness before now. It is interesting, something I meant to say about the Saturn Neptune conjunction, like that could be the end to illusions collectively as well. And I think I'm noticing myself with, and I'm relating it to this Mars Uranus conjunction, that it does feel like we're definitely in a time of change collectively. It really feels like we're in a time of revolutionary change, to be honest, and that feels quite scary. And I think personally, I'm starting to get my head around that a little bit more recently, and starting to think, okay, well, if that's true, what does that mean? You know, if I was to accept that and in the most positive way, like live based on that truth, what would that look like? Rather than being in fear and sort of just seeing it play out in terms of like geopolitics and all of the trauma and horror that is happening at the moment with a lot of the conflicts. And I'm interested in that because it feels that, you know, maybe with Mars coming in here to conjunct Uranus, there might actually be something about, okay, taking action based on new ideals and this new kind of paradigm that we're entering into, that might be more possible. And so I think it's really good to start asking ourselves, well, like, what would that look like? Like, if I was to take revolutionary action, what would that look like? Because I know personally, and I think this is true for a lot of us, if we individually were to take revolutionary action, it's hard to know what that would look like, but it wouldn't be war. It wouldn't be conflict. It wouldn't be violence. And I think the more we can start to actually dream and imagine and connect based on the change we would like to see, the more possible it is to actually take action, because it's quite scary to be witnessing the horrors that are happening and the power grabs that are happening. And, you know, we can reach a place that we're almost immobilized with that. But the reality is, you know, we are in a time of change. And I think consciousness is really shifting as well. And I think that's beyond anyone's ability to do a power grab on. So I think there is incredible potential for wonderful change. And I think something for myself in the last kind of week or so that's like helped me with this shift is just being in community with like heart-centered, intentional people. And it's suddenly you have a new reference point for change. It's like, oh, there's really good change happening also. And there is like, you know, potential to connect in with people and to do things that are good and that change things for the better. Rather than just, you know, because it's hard to get away from the power grab and the scary changes that are happening. That's my soapbox moment, the box moment on that one anyway. And I think, yeah, with the Saturn Neptune, we're sort of in this time, especially with the internet, where we're all interconnected more. So there sort of is an end to collective illusions on the one hand, that there's so many different voices and narratives. You know, it's not possible for one narrative to completely dominate in the way that maybe it could have in the past. And yet at the same time, that also brings new illusions and, you know, the spread of misinformation. So I just wonder about that with the Saturn Neptune as well. Like there's maybe something around collective truths and narratives and a new access to truth, but also a new creation of illusion that might be playing out as well with this transit. And then we have our full moon on Sunday, the 21st of July, and that's at 00 degrees of Aquarius, and the moon is conjunct Pluto. So again, on a collective level, full moon conjunct Pluto, that feels pretty feisty. It feels like certainly this month, I think overall there will be things playing out in the world stage. This also feels like kind of a highlighting again of like all of the energetic shifts that have been happening this year, because Pluto entering Aquarius, at least in tropical, is one of the big shifts that has happened this year. And here we have a full moon on this, as Pluto has retrograded back, and it's actually at that first 00 degrees of Aquarius. We have it highlighted with a full moon, which is really interesting. And I think we did have a moon. It could have been a new moon. We definitely had a moon as Pluto entered Aquarius. And yet now, like, it just feels like here we have another highlighting of it, and maybe we're in a steadier place, but there's still something about this new beginning. Like we're still in this new chapter, but maybe there's a bit more integrating around it now. And this full moon is really connected with the Mars-Uranus conjunction, and it's also connected with Neptune. So the moon is trine Mars and sextile Neptune, and obviously the sun is the other side of a full moon, and the sun is sextile Mars, Mars-Uranus, and trine Neptune. And so that just means everything I've talked about with the Mars-Neptune and also with Mars-Uranus and Neptune itself, and also being retrograde, are going to be flowing through this full moon. So around that time, the 21st of July, there could really be a peak, something being revealed, sort of a crescendo and a release that's also intertwined with revolutionary action, taking action on new ideals, and also where, you know, our wonderful creativity and spirituality with Neptune, or perhaps the process of disillusionment that we need to start to face into. And the last thing to mention is, so I tipped on it earlier, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is kind of the big collective transit that we've been going through, is finishing up at the end of July. So it's just about over before the full moon. And so there could be something of that in there as well. You know, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction has been active since, I think, last summer. Certainly we've been feeling it since kind of August, September last year, and it was at its peak in April of this year. So this sort of vast expansion of possibilities, whether that's in ways we think about things or literal horizons of possibilities in the world, also sudden changes that bring about sort of a shattering of the way we think of things, and also, you know, creative possibilities and new births, and that sort of like just really buoyant electric energy. We've all been through this whole journey with that now, and the wave is petering out and coming to an end. So it's a lovely point, maybe around the full moon, to reflect back on your journey over the last year and think back to yourself in July 2023, where you were, what you knew of yourself, what you thought to be possible. If you know the area of your chart that Jupiter Uranus was conjuncting in, you can really think about that area of your life and the themes, or the ways things have changed, or your maybe your horizons are broader, or your way of thinking has shifted, things that have you've been awakened to, maybe new creative projects that have either burst or been seeded for you in the last year. And it'd be a lovely time to reflect on that and maybe be able to integrate some of that. So yeah, so I wish you a really wonderful and calm July. Mind yourself with the active energies, and also yeah, I do really feel this sort of steadiness coming in July that I don't think we've had before. So hopefully we'll get to embrace that, and we will get to integrate and embody some of these new levels of consciousness that have been challenging our borders and expanding us vastly over the last 7 months. And as always, it's really interesting to hear if this resonates, or even if you have any questions, or if it doesn't resonate, maybe you're feeling something different. It's lovely to have those conversations and tease things out. So please do either, private message me, DM me, or feel free to leave some comments. And I'll see you next month.